Welcome to my full body mobility sequence, putting particular emphasis on the hips and thoracic spine. Some of these movements can be done by pretty much anybody, and some of them are quite advanced. Starting off with some hamstring swings, starting the movement smoothly and gently, becoming more ballistic with every rep, keeping my knee bent as necessary and my core braced so that my lower back and my hips aren't flexing or moving too much. Now I'm going to cross my leg, push my knee away and open up at the hip, and then I'm going to drop down to one side for a good TFL stretch, which is a muscle that is prone to getting tight, a good stretch to do for anyone with IT band syndrome. Reps wise, any of these movements can be repeated 5 to 10 times. And here I'm pushing up through my hips into a glute bridge, putting my shoulders to the side to do some slides, trying to keep my wrists and elbows on the ground at all time as I push overhead, which is more challenging than it looks. I'm trying to initiate the bridge from my hips and not arch through my back. Try and do a better job than me of keeping your rib cage down during extension and bracing through your core. This sequence can be done at any time. This was performed after a heavy squat session, which is why I'm struggling to keep my hips as high as they should be in this particular movement. Here I'm just putting more emphasis on a single leg load and some anti-rotation through my core and reaching over the opposite shoulder just for some thoracic movement. Here I come into what is effectively a recovery position, and I reach one hand long and pull it back, and then into some windmills, drawing the biggest circle I possibly can with my hand, keeping my arm close to my ear as I move overhead, and then switch to the other side. Notice how the movement is restricted to my upper back. My lower back and my hips aren't rotating, which is ideal for this sort of movement. You may get some cracks and pops in your upper back performing that movement. That's absolutely fine, provided it doesn't hurt, of course. Now I'm just doing some back rolls, everyone's favourite, and then rolling into a squat position using the momentum. Here's where it becomes potentially slightly advanced. Here I'm setting my shoulders back, effectively trying to pull my feet off the ground so that I'm keeping really tall through my spine and retracting my shoulders, pushing my hamstrings or my knees back to stretch through my hamstrings. And then I drop into a full squat, take hold of one ankle and rotate through my upper back while my hips are fixated. And now I'm doing a dynamic stretch of my quads and hip flexors, trying to push my knees towards the ground in a controlled manner, not letting them drop to the floor. So I'm keeping tension all the way in my legs and pushing my hips forward. You may need to lean to one side to make yourself slightly more stable, as I did in that demonstration. Make sure that you lean to both sides evenly. And now, just stealing some more of Ido Portal's squat sequence with some hip rotations. You may need to do this in a seated position with your hands behind you. And then I'm dropping into my shin box, leaning to stretch out my glute, and then leaning towards my opposite foot just to stretch my internal rotators. There's a hip switch. The basic hip switch is both feet on the ground. And now the advanced hip switch where I lift the foot and place it to where it needs to be. And here I'm basically doing some of what Kelly Starrett would call some informed freestyling, looking for the corners of tension in my hips and putting particular focus on those areas. One final hip switch into a full pigeon pose. And I'm going to keep this dynamic by keeping a lot of tension in my hips, pushing my hips as high as I can, and then pushing them down towards the floor. I exhale as I push towards the floor, getting a nice stretch through the front of my back hip. Notice how my lower back isn't arched, all of the extensions coming from my hip. Now transition into frog pose. And here you can either keep your feet on the floor, as is shown in this rep, or if it's more comfortable or it just feels better, you can bring your feet together. And further variation you can do for this is add in some internal rotation. So here I'm just slightly dropping my hip a bit too much, getting a bit of movement through my lumbar spine, which is not what we're trying to do here. But having said that, this is still an effective movement for your hips. Here I'm just going to drop into, I believe this is child pose. Yogis, correct me if I'm wrong. And just drawing some circles with my shoulders, trying to keep them off the ground as I reach overhead. Or you can perform some ITWs. And here, ignore the wobble. I'm transitioning into what I call a Duffin rock. And that's because I stole this from Chris Duffin. All of my weight is on my kneeling knee. And my stance leg is simply just stopping me from falling over. And here I'm just adding in some further hip rotations. This might be a good variation if you can't hit the full squat depth, as was demonstrated earlier. And this is also just some more informed freestyling. So I'm pushing into tightness, moving side to side. You can move front to back. You can move in a circular fashion. It's up to you to get to know where you're tight and where you're limited and restricted. Now I'm just doing some side-to-side hip switches, trying to increase the angle between my shins, so I'm aiming for 90 degrees. That might be quite tough. I'm not quite achieving it. And here I'm going to push back into a down dog, so I'm going to push my heels back towards the floor, bum towards the ceiling, and pull through into a cobra, I think. And notice how I'm also pushing my head back towards my knees. You can move your feet closer if that is easier on your hamstrings, and you can rest your hips down as you extend through if the upper body load is slightly too much for repetition. Stepping into a Spider-Man and dropping my elbow down to accentuate the stretch, and then opening up for some thoracic rotation before pushing back and getting the thoracic extension. Now I'm loading up in my calves, so I'm pushing my bum towards my heels, lifting my heels off the ground, stepping forward, back into the Spider-Man, and then doing two variations of a hamstring stretch. So here I'm stretching through my calves, stepping forward, rocking back to my back leg, keeping my front leg straight, and now I'm pushing my hips as high as I can, lifting my toe off the ground, again stretching through that hamstring. And now I'm going to pivot into a Cossack squat and do some more advanced hip rotation. Just taking my toe towards the floor, then bringing my knee down and walking out to bring the stretch to my adductors. So in this Cossack position, you may find it easier if you are on your toes with your heel off the ground. You may need your hands on the ground for stability. That's absolutely fine. Walking out and relaxing into this position, feeling the stretch on the inside of my thigh. And now just to advance the stretch even further, I'm dropping my knee towards the floor, and then some dynamic switches, getting progressively higher, just getting a bit of a load through the legs. Coming towards the end now, just feeling out some last bits of tension, pushing my hips forward, don't arch through your back, just opening up. And that's that. Thanks for watching, guys. Please check out JC Strength Coach on Instagram.